Get out of my company today." The words exploded through the glass walls of the top-floor office, sharp enough to cut through the hum of printers and quiet conversations across the entire 32nd floor, and Daniel Hayes froze mid-step with a maintenance clipboard in his hand, because no one had ever heard Victoria Hale lose control like that. Phones stopped. Keyboards paused. Even the soft buzz of fluorescent lights seemed to hesitate as her voice echoed down the corridor, followed by the sudden crack of something hitting the floor. Daniel should have walked away. A man like him, a single dad juggling late shifts and early mornings, a guy who fixed broken things and stayed invisible. He knew the rules. Don't look up. Don't get involved. Don't step into rooms that don't belong to you. But something in the silence that followed, it didn't feel like power anymore. It felt like something breaking. He took one step closer, then another. The door to her office was slightly open, just enough for a sliver of cold white light to spill into the hallway like a secret trying to escape. Inside, the skyline stretched wide through floor-to-ceiling glass, the late afternoon sun painting everything in gold, but the air felt heavy, unmoving, like the calm before a storm that had already passed. Daniel pushed the door open gently, barely a sound, and what he saw stopped him cold. Victoria Hale, CEO, dealmaker, the woman who ran billion-dollar meetings without blinking, was standing behind her desk, shoulders tight, one hand pressed against the polished surface, the other covering her face as her breath caught unevenly, like she had forgotten how to keep it steady. For a second, neither of them moved. Then she looked up. Her eyes were red, sharp, unguarded in a way no one was ever supposed to see. "You saw nothing," she said, her voice low but edged with steel, the kind that built empires. "Close the door and walk out." 3 commands. Clear. Final. Daniel didn't move. The city outside shimmered in silence. The air conditioning hummed softly overhead. Somewhere far below, a horn echoed faintly between buildings, distant and irrelevant. He should have nodded, should have left, should have pretended this moment never existed. But instead, he stepped inside and let the door close behind him with a quiet click that sounded louder than it should have. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said, his voice steady, calm in a way that didn't challenge her, didn't shrink either. Victoria's jaw tightened. "Then leave." Another command, another line drawn. Daniel set his clipboard down slowly on the edge of a chair, his movements deliberate, respectful. "I will," he said, "if that's what you really need." The words hung there, simple, unpolished, and for the first time, something shifted. Not in the room. In her. She inhaled sharply, as if the answer she expected hadn't come. The silence stretched longer now, heavier, pressing against the glass, the desk, the distance between them. Then, almost too quiet to hear, she spoke again. "Just stay." Not a command this time. A request. And in that moment, something invisible cracked wide open, because the most powerful woman in the building had just asked the one man no one noticed not to walk away. Daniel did not sit right away. He stood there for a second longer, as if measuring the weight of her words, then slowly pulled the chair a few inches back and lowered himself into it without a sound. Victoria did not look at him. She turned slightly toward the glass wall, arms crossing tightly as if holding herself together, her reflection staring back at her from the skyline beyond. The city moved on below, cars threading through late afternoon traffic, people walking, deals being made, lives continuing as if nothing had cracked open on the 32nd floor. "Do not say anything," she said quietly, her voice steadier now but still fragile at the edges. "I do not need advice. I do not need comfort." 3 statements. Sharp. Controlled. Daniel nodded once, even though she was not looking. "Okay," he replied simply. The room settled into a different kind of silence then, not empty, but full. The hum of the air conditioning returned. The faint ticking of a wall clock somewhere behind him marked each passing second with quiet precision. Victoria's breathing began to slow, uneven at first, then steadier, like someone relearning a rhythm they had lost. Minutes passed. 5, maybe 10. Time stretched in a way that did not feel uncomfortable, only unfamiliar. Daniel rested his hands loosely on his knees, his posture calm, his presence steady without pushing into her space. He did not check his watch. He did not glance at the door. He stayed. Outside, the golden light shifted slightly, casting longer shadows across the floor, reflecting off the glass desk and softening the hard edges of the room. Victoria finally spoke again, softer now, almost to herself. "They think I do not feel anything," she said, a faint, bitter breath escaping with the words. "That I can just make decisions and walk away." She paused, her fingers tightening against her sleeve. "Like it does not cost me anything." Daniel listened, his gaze steady but gentle, not interrupting, not filling the space she had opened. She turned her head, just enough to glance at him, searching, measuring. "You heard what I said on that call," she added, her voice quieter still. "You know what I did." Another pause. The question sat there, unspoken but clear. Daniel answered without hesitation, his tone even, grounded. "I heard someone trying to hold everything together," he said. "No judgment. No pras. Just truth." Victoria blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity of it. For a moment, the tension in her shoulders eased just slightly. She turned back to the window, exhaling slowly. "It is not supposed to be like this," she whispered. The words hung in the air, heavy with something deeper than frustration. Daniel leaned back a fraction, giving her space while still being present. "Most things are not," he said quietly. Silence returned again, but this time it felt different. Softer, less sharp, the kind that did not press in but held steady. Victoria closed her eyes for a brief moment, then opened them, her reflection still staring back at her, but no longer as unsteady as before. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. "Why are you still here?" she asked, turning fully now, her eyes meeting his directly, searching for something real, something that would not shift under pressure. Daniel met her gaze without flinching, calm, grounded, unhurried. "Because you asked me to stay," he said. One sentence, no more. And for the first time that day, Victoria did not have a response ready. The silence that followed was not empty. It was understanding. Victoria held his gaze for a moment longer, as if trying to decide whether his answer was enough or whether it was simply too simple to trust. Then she looked away again, but this time not toward the window, not toward the city, but down at the edge of her desk where her phone still lay cracked, silent, useless. "You always do that?" she asked, her voice quieter now, less guarded, though still careful. "Stay when it is inconvenient?" Daniel shifted slightly in his chair, not defensive, not proud, just present. "I stay when it matters," he said. 3 words, steady, grounded. Victoria let out a small breath that almost sounded like a laugh, but it did not quite reach that point. "And how do you decide that?" she asked, glancing back at him, her eyes sharper now, searching for something more than calm. Daniel paused, just for a second, not because he did not know the answer, but because he chose his words with care. "You can tell," he said, "when someone is not asking for help out loud, but they still need someone in the room." Silence followed again, but it did not feel heavy anymore. It felt like something settling into place. Victoria's posture eased just slightly. Her shoulders no longer held as tight, her arms no longer locked across herself like armor. She moved around the desk slowly and sat down, not in the chair of authority at the center, but at the corner, as if she needed less distance now. The shift was small, almost unnoticeable, but it changed everything. "Do you know what they expect from me?" she asked after a moment, her tone quieter, more honest than before. "They expect certainty. They expect control. They expect me to make decisions that cost people everything and never hesitate." She looked down at her hands, fingers loosely intertwined now instead of clenched. "They expect me to be right every time." Daniel listened, his expression unchanged, calm, steady, giving her space to finish without interruption. "And today," she continued, her voice tightening just slightly, "I made a call that is going to change a lot of lives. People will lose things they have built for years. And I'm supposed to walk out there and act like it is just another Tuesday." She exhaled slowly, the weight of it settling into the room. The clock ticked once, then again. Daniel leaned forward just a fraction, not intruding, just present enough to be heard. You made the call because you had to, he said. Not a question, not a judgment, just a statement. Victoria looked up at him, her eyes narrowing slightly, not in anger, but in recognition. You do not know that, she replied, testing him. Daniel held her gaze calm, unshaken. No, he said, but I know people do not break down over decisions they take lightly. The words landed softly, but they carried weight. Victoria blinked, her expression shifting, something inside her loosening just a little more. For a brief moment, the tension in her face faded, replaced by something quieter, something closer to relief. She leaned back slightly, her shoulders finally lowering in a way that looked almost unfamiliar on her. You are not what I expected, she said after a pause, her voice steady now, but different, less sharp, more open. Daniel gave a faint, almost invisible smile. Most people are not, he replied. Another silence followed, but this one did not ask for anything. It simply existed, calm, steady, real. And somewhere between the ticking clock and the fading sunlight, the distance between them was no longer about position or power. It was about something quieter, something neither of them had planned for, but neither of them was walking away from. Victoria studied him in the quiet that followed, not with the sharp calculation she used in boardrooms, but with something slower, more careful, as if she was trying to understand a language she had not spoken in years. Then she leaned forward slightly, her fingers resting against the edge of the desk, no longer gripping it, just touching it like she needed something steady. If I asked you to forget this, she said, her voice calm again but softer than before. Everything you saw, everything you heard, would you? 3 questions hidden in one. Daniel did not answer immediately. He let the silence breathe for a moment, the faint hum of the building filling the space between them, the city outside dimming as the sun lowered behind the skyline. No, he said finally. One word. Honest. Victoria's eyes flickered, not offended, but surprised. No, she repeated, a slight edge returning, testing him again. Daniel shook his head once, slow, respectful. I would not use it, he clarified, but I would not pretend it did not happen either. The distinction landed quietly, but it carried weight. Victoria leaned back in her chair, her gaze holding his now, searching for anything that felt false, anything that felt like strategy, but finding none. You are either very naive, she said, her tone measured, or very sure. Of yourself. Daniel exhaled lightly, almost a smile but not quite. Neither, he replied. Just clear. Another silence followed, softer now, less guarded. Victoria's posture shifted again, the last traces of tension in her shoulders easing as if she no longer needed to hold herself in place quite so tightly. She glanced at the cracked phone on her desk, then back at him. They will come in here soon, she said, her voice returning to something closer to the version of her the world knew, but not entirely the same. Executives, advisors, people who expect me to have everything under control. She paused, her fingers brushing lightly against the surface of the desk. And I will. 3 words. Firm, certain. But this time, there was no performance behind them, just decision. Daniel nodded once, understanding without needing explanation. I figured, he said quietly. Victoria's lips pressed together for a moment, then relaxed. But before that, she continued, her voice lowering again, not as fragile as before, but still carrying something real beneath it. I need one thing. She met his eyes fully now, no distance, no barrier. Just for a few minutes. I need this to be real. The request hung in the air, simple but heavy with meaning. Daniel did not ask her to explain. He did not fill the space with questions or assumptions. He just nodded once, steady. Okay, he said. Victoria let out a slow breath, the kind that did not break, just released. She closed her eyes for a second, then opened them again. And for the first time since he had walked in, there was no trace of the sharp, untouchable CEO in her expression. Just a person standing in a quiet room, trying to hold on to something honest before stepping back into a world that demanded everything else. Outside, The lights in the building began to flicker on one by one as evening settled in, reflections layering over the glass walls, turning the office into something both exposed and hidden at the same time. Inside, neither of them moved. Neither of them needed to. And in that stillness, without announcement, without negotiation, something shifted again, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable, because for the first time all day, she was not alone. And for the first time since he had stepped into the room, he understood exactly why he had stayed. Victoria did. Not rush to speak again. She stayed where she was, hands resting lightly against the desk, eyes no longer avoiding his, but no longer challenging either, as if something inside her had shifted from defense to something quieter, something more honest. The room held that stillness, not empty, not tense, just steady, like a breath held without strain. Then she moved, slowly stepping away from the desk and walking toward the glass wall, her reflection catching up with her as the city lights flickered on behind it, turning the skyline into a field of soft gold and distant motion. "Do you ever get tired?" she asked without turning around, her voice calm, but carrying something deeper now, something closer to truth and control, of holding everything together for everyone else. 3 parts, 1 question. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair, his gaze following her, but not pressing, not intruding. "Sometimes," he answered, "but not the way people think." Victoria tilted her head, just slightly listening. "What does that mean?" she asked. Daniel took a breath, not heavy, just enough to settle his words. "It means you do not get tired of caring," he said. "You get tired of pretending it does not affect you." The words landed gently, but they did not disappear. They stayed. Victoria's shoulders lowered another fraction, her posture no longer held in that rigid line of control she had carried all day. She rested one hand against the glass, her fingers barely touching it, as if grounding herself in something real. "They think I do not feel it," she said quietly. "Every decision, every name on a list, every life that shifts because I said yes or no." Her voice did not break this time, but it softened, the edges no longer sharp. "But I remember all of them." Daniel listened, his expression unchanged, not because it lacked emotion, but because it did not need to prove it. "That is why it matters that you're the one making those decisions," he said. "Not praise, not comfort, just truth again." Victoria let out a slow breath, her reflection staring back at her, but this time it did not look like someone unraveling. It looked like someone holding steady in a different way. She turned slightly, just enough to see him over her shoulder. "You talk like someone who has been there," she said, her tone thoughtful now, no accusation, no test, just observation. Daniel did not look away. "Different situation," he replied. "Same weight." She studied him for a moment, really studied him this time, as if the quiet man sitting across from her did not quite fit the role she had assigned to him when he first walked in. "You are not just maintenance," she said. It was not a question. Daniel gave a small, almost invisible shrug. "I fix what is in front of me," he answered. Victoria turned fully now, facing him, the distance between them no longer defined by titles or roles, but by something far simpler. "That is not what I meant," she said. 3 words, clear. Daniel met her gaze, calm, steady. "I know," he replied. Silence followed again, but this one carried something new, something that had not been there before. Respect. Not declared, not demanded, just present. Victoria walked back toward the desk, but she did not sit behind it this time. She stopped at the same corner as before, closer, less distant. "When you walked in," she said slowly, choosing each word, "I was trying to hold everything together." She paused, her eyes steady on his. "Now I'm trying to understand why I do not have to do that alone." The statement lingered, quiet but powerful. Daniel did not rush to answer. He did not need to, because in that moment, the truth had already settled into the room, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. And for the first time since the day began, Victoria Hale was not carrying the weight of it by herself. Daniel let her words settle without reaching for them, without trying to shape them into something easier, because he understood that some truths were not meant to be softened, only held. The office had grown quieter now as evening fully took over, the last traces of sunlight fading into reflections of city lights that shimmered across the glass walls, turning everything into layers of shadow and glow. Victoria stood there, closer than before, no desk between them, no barrier left to maintain. "You do not have to answer that," he said finally, his voice low, steady, giving her space to take back what she had just admitted if she needed to. She shook her head once, small but certain. "No," she replied. "I think I do." 3 words. "No hositashchin." She walked a few steps past him, not away, just enough to shift the angle, her gaze drifting briefly to the door as if she could already feel the world waiting on the other side of it. "I built everything around control," she continued, her tone calm but reflective now. "Every meeting, every decision, every conversation. If I stay in control, nothing falls apart." She paused, her fingers brushing lightly against the back of the chair he had been sitting in, grounding herself again in something simple, something real. "But today," she added, quieter now, it did. The admission did not sound like failure. It sounded like truth. Daniel rose slowly from the chair, not abrupt, not imposing, just standing so he could meet her at the same level, the distance between them no longer defined by position, but by presence. "Things do not fall apart because you lose control," he said. "They fall apart because you carry them alone for too long." The words landed softly, but they did not fade. Victoria turned toward him fully now, her expression searching again, but not defensive this time, just trying to understand something she had never allowed herself to consider. "And what happens if you stop carrying it alone?" she asked. 3 parts. 1 question. Daniel met her gaze, steady, unshaken. "Then it does not break you," he answered. Silence followed, deeper than before, not empty, but full of something that felt like a turning point neither of them had planned for. The faint ticking of the clock continued behind them, steady, grounding, while somewhere in the building a distant elevator chimed softly, a reminder that the world was still moving, still expecting, still waiting. Victoria exhaled slowly, her shoulders lowering in a way that looked almost unfamiliar now, like she was letting go of something she had held for years without realizing it. "I do not know how to do that," she admitted, her voice quiet but clear. Not a confession of weakness, a statement of fact. Dana nodded once, not surprised, not judging. "You do not have to know yet," he said. "You just have to stop pretending you do." The simplicity of it shifted something again. Victoria's lips parted slightly, as if she was about to respond, then closed again, her expression softening instead of sharpening. For a moment, she just stood there, letting the words settle without, resisting them. Then, almost without thinking, she reached out and rested her hand lightly on the edge of the desk beside him, not touching him, not crossing a line, but close enough to feel the presence of someone who had not walked away. "Stay until they come in," she said quietly, her eyes meeting his again, steady now, no trace of the earlier fracture. "Not as my employee." A pause, then softer, just as someone who understands. The request was simple, but it carried everything. Daniel did not hesitate. He nodded once, calm, grounded. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. And this time, when the silence returned, it did not feel like something waiting to break. It felt like something finally holding together. The quiet between them held steady, unbroken, until a soft knock echoed from the other side of the glass door, polite but firm, the kind that belonged to people who were used to being let in without question. Victoria's eyes shifted toward it immediately, instinct returning, posture straightening just slightly, but not all the way, not back to what it had been before. "Ms. Hale," a voice called from outside, measured, professional. "The board is ready." 3 words that carried pressure, expectation, consequence. Victoria did not answer right away. She stood there, her gaze lingering on the door, then slowly turned back to Daniel, as if the space between those 2 moments mattered more than anything waiting outside. "This is where it changes," she said quietly. Not dramatic, not uncertain, just clear. Daniel nodded once, understanding without needing explanation. "It already has," he replied. The words were simple, but they landed with weight. Victoria held his gaze for a second longer, something unspoken passing between them, something built in silence rather than words. Then she reached for the phone on her desk, turning it over in her hand, noticing the crack across the screen like she was seeing it for the first time. She set it down carefully, not with frustration this time, but with intention. "Give me a minute," she called toward the door, her voice calm, steady, controlled again, but different now, grounded instead of guarded. Of course, the voice responded, footsteps retreating slightly, waiting. Victoria exhaled slowly, then looked back at Daniel. "You said something earlier," she began, her tone thoughtful, measured, "that people do not break over decisions they take lightly." She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if connecting something she had not fully seen before. "You spoke like you knew that from experience." Daniel did not shift, did not look away. "I do," he said. One sentence. No explanation offered. Victoria stepped closer, not invading, just closing the distance enough to see him more clearly, not as an employee, not as a background presence, but as someone standing equal in that moment. "That is not something you learn from fixing broken equipment," she said. Not an accusation, an observation. Daniel gave a small breath, almost a quiet acknowledgement. "No," he replied. The room held still again, but this time the silence carried curiosity, not tension. Victoria studied him carefully, her eyes tracing something deeper than what she had seen before, something that did not match the role he carried in the building. "Who were you before this?" she asked. 3 words. Direct. Honest. Daniel hesitated for the first time, not because he did not know the answer, but because he chose whether it mattered. Then he spoke calm, steady. "Someone who made decisions that affected people," he said, "and had to live with them." He did not elaborate. He did not need to. Victoria's expression shifted, something clicking into place, something that reframed everything she thought she understood about the man in front of her. "That is why you stayed," she said slowly. Not a question. Daniel met her gaze, steady as before. "That is why I did not leave," he corrected gently. The distinction settled between them, quiet but powerful. Victoria let out a slow breath, her shoulders lifting and falling once, controlled but no longer rigid. "Then I suppose," she said, her voice softer now, but carrying a quiet strength, "you understand what I am about to walk into." Daniel nodded once. "Yes." One word. "Certain." The knock did not come again, but the expectation behind the door remained, steady, waiting. Victoria glanced toward it one last time, then back at him. "Stay here," she said quietly, "just until I come back." A pause. Then, more personal. "I need to know this moment was real." Daniel did not hesitate. "It was," he said, and for a brief second, before she turned and walked toward the door, there was no CEO, no employee, no distance left between them. Only 2 people who understood the weight of what came next, and the quiet strength it took to face it without walking away. The door closed softly behind Victoria, and for a moment, the room felt larger, quieter, like the air itself had shifted now that she was gone. Daniel did not move. He stood where he was, his gaze drifting toward the glass wall where the city stretched endlessly, lights flickering on one by one as dusk settled into night. The hum of the building returned to its steady rhythm, distant voices, muted footsteps, the quiet pulse of a place that never truly stopped. Minutes passed, not rushed, not empty, just time doing what it always did, moving forward without asking permission. Then, faintly through the glass, movement. The boardroom across the corridor came alive, silhouettes gathering, suits and posture and expectation filling the space. Victoria stepped into that room without hesitation, her back straight, her pace measured, the version of her the world recognized restored with precision. But something was different. Daniel could not hear the words spoken inside, but he could see the shift. She did not rush. She did not dominate. She stood, listened, then spoke, her gestures calm, controlled, but no longer rigid. There was no trace of the fracture from earlier, but there was also no mask hiding it completely. It was something else, something steadier, the kind of strength that did not need to prove itself. Inside the boardroom, a man leaned forward, speaking sharply, his posture tense, demanding. Another followed, pointing toward documents spread across the table. The pressure was visible even from a distance. This was the moment, the one that would define everything that came next. Victoria did not interrupt. She let them finish. She let the room fill with expectation, with urgency, with the weight of decisions that could not be undone. Then she spoke. Calm, clear, final. The room changed. Not abruptly, not dramatically, but undeniably. Shoulders lowered, voices quieted, attention shifted fully toward her, not because she forced it, but because she held it without effort. Daniel watched carefully, not as an employee observing a superior, but as someone who understood what it cost to stand in that moment and not break. He noticed the smallest things. The way her hands rested lightly on the table instead of gripping it. The way she paused between sentences, not searching but choosing. The way she met each person's gaze without challenge, without retreat. It was not control in the way she had described before. It was something quieter, something stronger. Time moved again. 10 minutes. 15. The tension in the room eased, replaced by something more structured, more focused. Decisions were made. Not rushed, not avoided. Made. And then, slowly, the meeting ended. Chairs shifted. Papers gathered. Conversations lowered to a murmur as people stood and began to file out, their expressions no longer sharp with pressure, but thoughtful, measured. Victoria remained seated for a moment longer after they left, alone at the table. From where he stood, Daniel could see her shoulders rise and fall once, controlled, steady. Then she stood, smoothing her jacket, and walked back toward her office. The door opened. She stepped inside, and for a second, just one, the world outside that room seemed to pause again. She looked at him, not as a CEO returning from a meeting, not as someone reclaiming authority, but as the same person who had asked him to stay. "It is done," she said quietly. 3 words. Simple, but behind them was everything. Daniel nodded once, steady. "I know," he replied. The silence that followed was not about what had happened. It was about what had changed, and neither of them needed to say it out loud for it to be true. Victoria did not move further into the room right away. She stood just inside the doorway, one hand still lightly resting against the handle, as if she had not fully decided whether she had returned or whether she had simply paused between 2 different versions of herself. The city lights reflected behind her, framing her silhouette not as something distant or untouchable, but as something grounded, real. Daniel remained where he was, steady, giving her the same quiet space he had offered from the beginning, not stepping forward, not stepping back. "They agreed," she said after a moment, her voice calm, no trace of the earlier strain, but carrying something deeper now, something earned. "Not because I pushed them." A brief pause. "Because I did not." 3 parts. 1 truth. Daniel nodded once, understanding without needing more. Victoria took a slow step into the room, letting the door close softly behind her, the outside world fading again into muted distance. "I thought control was what held everything together," she continued, walking toward the desk, but not stopping. Behind it, choosing instead to stand at its edge, closer, less removed. But it was the opposite. She looked at him directly now, her eyes steady, clear. It was what was breaking it. The words did not carry regret. They carried realization. Daniel shifted slightly, resting one hand against the back of the chair he had been sitting in, grounded, present. "Control keeps things in place," he said, "but it does not keep them whole." The distinction settled between them, quiet but undeniable. Victoria exhaled slowly, her shoulders rising and falling once, controlled but no longer rigid. "You were right," she said. Not loud, not dramatic, just honest. 3 words that meant more than they sounded. Daniel gave a small shake of his head. "You figured it out," he replied. "That is different." The room held that exchange gently, without tension, without resistance. Outside, the building had fully transitioned into night, the glass now reflecting more of the room than the city, turning the space inward, intimate in a way it had not been before. Victoria glanced briefly at her reflection, then back at him, as if seeing both versions at once, and choosing which one to keep. "You are going to walk out of here," she said slowly, her tone thoughtful, "and everything will look the same to everyone else." She paused, her gaze steady. "But it will not be." Daniel met her eyes, calm, grounded. "It does not have to be visible to matter," he said. One sentence. Simple. Complete. Victoria let out a faint breath that almost resembled a quiet laugh, not from amusement, but from recognition. "No," she agreed softly. "It does not." Silence followed, but this one was different from all the others. It was not about uncertainty. It was not about pressure. It was about something settled, something understood without needing to be repeated. Victoria straightened slightly, not returning to the rigid posture of before, but finding a balance between strength and ease that felt natural now. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice steady, composed, "everything continues. Meetings, decisions, expectations." A brief pause, but not like before. Daniel nodded once. "That is enough," he said. Victoria held his gaze for a moment longer, then added quietly, "Thank you for staying." 3 words. No condition. No distance. Daniel did not answer immediately. He simply gave a small nod, the kind that did not dismiss the moment, but did not claim it either. Then, after a second, he spoke. "You asked me to." And in that quiet exchange, without announcement, without anything dramatic or loud, the room held something rare, something that did not come from power or position, but from presence, from dignity, from the simple choice not to walk away when it would have been easier to do so. And for the first time, neither of them needed to prove anything at all.